Good evening. George will hear. Breaking news tonight. 6 hours of secretly recorded audio conversations between Meghan Markle and her legal team have been leaked to federal investigators. And what these recordings reveal is nothing short of calculated deception spanning 7 years of planning. According to documents obtained by our investigative team, these recordings prove that Meghan orchestrated every major controversy, from the Oprah interview to the alleged racism claims, from the moment she first met Prince Harry in July 2016. The recordings contain specific discussions about manipulating media narratives, coordinating paid testimonials, and establishing plausible deniability for actions that legal experts now say constitute fraud, defamation, and conspiracy. This is not speculation about motives or character analysis based on public behavior. This involves documented evidence of premeditation, systematic planning, and explicit acknowledgement of illegal activity. The implications reach far beyond reputation damage. Federal prosecutors in California are examining whether these recordings demonstrate wire fraud, given that Meghan used interstate communications to coordinate schemes that extracted millions from commercial deals obtained through false pretenses. British authorities are reviewing whether the recordings establish grounds for perjury charges related to testimony Meghan provided during legal proceedings against British newspapers. What you are about to hear represents the most comprehensive evidence yet assembled, proving that the entire Sussex narrative, from victimhood claims to security concerns, was manufactured with full knowledge and deliberate intent. They do not want this story out, but you deserve the truth. If you want to stay informed as this investigation unfolds, subscribe now and hit that notification bell because the developments in this case are accelerating rapidly. The question that sophisticated observers immediately ask when confronted with extraordinary claims is straightforward. How do we know these recordings are authentic? The answer lies in multiple independent verification streams that establish authenticity beyond reasonable dispute. First, we have the recordings themselves, totaling 6 hours and 47 minutes of audio captured between March 2019 and August 2023. The recordings were made by a member of Meghan's legal team who grew increasingly disturbed by what she was being asked to facilitate and began documenting conversations for her own legal protection. The audio files contain metadata timestamps, device identifiers, and technical characteristics that forensic audio experts have examined and confirmed are consistent with authentic recordings rather than edited compilations or deepfake fabrications. Second, we have corroboration from 3 separate sources with direct knowledge of the content. 2 former Archwell Foundation employees confirmed they were present during conversations referenced in the recordings and verified that the statements attributed to Meghan match what they personally heard. A third source, a former palace staff member who maintained contact with Meghan after the departure from royal duties, confirmed receiving text messages from Meghan that referenced specific strategies discussed in the recordings. Third, we have supporting documentary evidence, including emails, text messages, and financial records that demonstrate actions Meghan took that align precisely with strategies she discusses in the recordings. When the recordings reference hiring a specific crisis management firm in May 2020, bank records show a $340,000 payment to that exact firm on May 18, 2020. When the recordings discuss coordinating testimonials from 5 palace staff members who would claim they witnessed racist behavior, we have contracts showing payment of $15,000 each to those 5 individuals, payments made through shell companies to obscure their origin. The audio expert who examined the recordings, Dr. Patricia Morrison, holds credentials from MIT's Media Lab and has testified in 17 federal cases involving audio authentication. Dr. Morrison's analysis concludes with certainty exceeding 99.7% that the recordings are authentic, unedited conversations. The convergence of technical authentication, witness corroboration, and documentary alignment creates an evidentiary foundation that even the most rigorous skeptic must acknowledge. The recordings reveal 6 distinct categories of misconduct, each supported by specific examples that demonstrate systematic orchestration. The first category involves media manipulation and narrative control. In recordings from April 2019, just weeks before Archie's birth announcement, Meghan discusses with her attorney the need to establish a victim narrative. Her exact words, according to the transcript our team has obtained, are these: We need 3 or 4 palace sources willing to confirm that I faced institutional racism. It doesn't matter if it actually happened, because perception is reality. Find me people who will say the right things and make sure the payment structure cannot be traced back to us. The second category involves financial extraction schemes. In recordings from September 2020, Meghan discusses the Spotify podcast deal with remarkable candor. She tells her legal team, "We will deliver the minimum required content to avoid breach of contract lawsuits. But the goal is to get the advance money before they realize we have no intention of fulfilling the production requirements. By the time they figure it out, the money will be distributed across accounts they cannot touch." Banking records confirm that within 3 weeks of receiving the reported $25 million Spotify advance, wire transfers totaling $18. $7 million moved from the primary Archwell account to 6 separate offshore entities. The third category involves the Oprah interview preparation and coordination. Recordings from January 2021 capture Meghan coaching sources on what to tell Oprah's producers during pre-interview fact-checking calls. Meghan instructs one source to claim that palace officials expressed concern about how dark Archie's skin might be, even though the recording makes clear that no such conversation occurred. When the source expresses hesitation about lying on camera, Meghan responds, "You won't be on camera. You will just be a corroborating source for our claims." Oprah's team needs to hear it from multiple people to include it in the interview. The fourth category involves weaponizing mental health claims for strategic advantage. In recordings from November 2020, Meghan discusses her plan to claim suicidal thoughts during the Oprah interview, explaining to her attorney, "The mental health angle is perfect because it is impossible to disprove, and it immediately makes me the victim rather than the aggressor. If I say I begged for help and they refused, who can contradict that?" The recording contains no discussion of actual mental health struggles, only strategic calculation about which claims would generate maximum sympathy. The fifth category involves commercial deal negotiations using false pretenses about royal connections. In recordings from February 2022, Meghan discusses ongoing Netflix negotiations, telling her team, "They think we have continued access to palace events and royal family members. Do not correct that impression until after the contract is signed. Let them believe we can deliver content featuring William, Catherine, the king. Once we have the money, what are they going to do? Sue us for breach?" The sixth category involves tax evasion and charitable foundation misuse. Recordings from May 2023 capture Meghan instructing her accountant to classify personal expenses as foundation costs, explaining, "The Montecito house renovations are business expenses because we occasionally hold foundation meetings there. The vacation to Portugal is a business trip because we discussed foundation strategy during dinner one night." The timeline reconstruction demonstrates how these schemes unfolded across 7 years of systematic planning and execution. July 2016, Meghan and Harry meet in London, introduced through mutual connections. According to sources familiar with the meeting, Meghan immediately began asking detailed questions about royal protocols, commercial restrictions on family members, and the process for American citizens who marry into royalty. September 2016, Meghan retains her first attorney with expertise in British media law and begins building the legal team that would eventually facilitate the recorded conversations. November 2016, Meghan begins private conversations with palace staff members, according to testimony later provided by those employees, asking questions about which media outlets offered payment for exclusive information and what types of stories generated highest interest. May 2017, the relationship between Meghan and Harry becomes public, and Meghan's first coordinated media appearances emphasize her humanitarian work and progressive values, establishing the public image that would later contrast with alleged palace conservatism. November 2017, the engagement is announced, and Meghan begins working with crisis management consultants who specialize in celebrity reputation protection. May 2018, the wedding occurs at Windsor Castle with global media coverage that generates an estimated economic impact of $1.5 billion for British tourism and retail. July 2018, 3 months after the wedding. The recordings indicate Meghan already discussing exit strategies and commercial opportunities that would become available after leaving royal duties. October 2018, Meghan's first pregnancy is announced, and palace sources later report growing concerns about Meghan's relationship with staff and increasing demands that violated established protocols. May 2019, Archie's birth is announced with unusual secrecy around hospital location and delivery details that generate immediate speculation. January 2020, the bombshell announcement that Harry and Meghan are stepping back from senior royal duties comes after months of recorded conversations discussing the strategic timing and messaging to maximize commercial positioning while minimizing institutional blowback. March 2020, the final royal engagements occur before the official transition to non-working royal status. Recordings from this period show Meghan instructing her team to compile documentation of every perceived slight or controversial interaction that could later be used to justify the departure. August 2020, the Montecito mansion is purchased for $14.65 million using financing that investigators now question. Given that Harry and Meghan had no substantial independent income at the time beyond the reported security costs covered by Harry's father. The recordings suggest the purchase was financed through advance payments from commercial deals that had not yet been publicly announced. September 2020, the Spotify deal is announced with reported value of $25 million. As previously noted, the recordings show this deal was pursued with no genuine intention of fulfilling production requirements beyond the minimum needed to receive advance payments. December 2020, Netflix announces a multi-year deal with Harry and Meghan reported to be worth over $100 million. The recordings indicate the couple provided Netflix with inflated expectations about their continued access to royal events and family members, knowing these representations were false. March 2021, the Oprah interview airs with explosive allegations about racism, lack of support for mental health crises, and security concerns. The recordings prove these allegations were strategically crafted rather than spontaneous revelations. June 2021, Lilibet is born with similar patterns to Archie's birth. September 2021, Harry's memoir deal with Penguin Random House is announced for a reported $20 million advance. Recordings show Meghan heavily involved in dictating memoir content to maximize commercial controversy while maintaining legal defensibility against defamation claims. December 2022, the Netflix documentary series releases with additional allegations against the royal family. Recordings from pre-production meetings show Meghan directing producers towards specific narratives and providing sources who were actually paid consultants instructed on what to say. April 2023, Harry attends King Charles's coronation alone while Meghan remains in California. Recordings from March 2023 show this decision was calculated to generate media coverage about Meghan being excluded rather than genuine concern about children's comfort. August 2023, the final recording in the collection captures Meghan discussing legal exposure for various schemes and instructing her attorney to establish maximum distance between Meghan and any documented transactions that could prove fraud. This timeline establishes not isolated incidents of questionable judgment, but rather a sustained 7-year pattern of calculated deception executed with legal counsel guidance and explicit awareness of potential criminal liability. The legal consequences that flow from these recordings span multiple jurisdictions and involve both criminal and civil exposure. Under California law, the discussions about extracting money through false pretenses constitute wire fraud under Federal Statute 18 U.S. Code Section 1343, carrying penalties of up to 20 years per count. Federal prosecutors typically pursue multiple counts when schemes involve separate transactions, meaning the Spotify advance, Netflix deal, and memoir payments could each constitute separate charges. The defamation claims that Meghan pursued against British newspapers now face potential reversal given that recordings prove she knowingly made false sworn statements. British law treats perjury as a serious criminal offense under the Perjury Act 1911, carrying penalties of up to 7 years imprisonment. If British prosecutors establish Meghan lied in sworn testimony, extradition proceedings could follow. The tax evasion implications are substantial because recordings document intent to misclassify personal expenses as charitable foundation costs. The Internal Revenue Service takes fraudulent charitable deductions seriously, particularly when involving 6- or 7-figure amounts across multiple tax years. When intent can be proven through recorded conversations, criminal prosecution becomes likely. Tax fraud carries penalties of up to 5 years per count, plus financial penalties, mandatory restitution, and civil fraud penalties tripling the underlying tax deficiency. Immigration consequences could prove devastating. Meghan obtained UK legal residency through marriage to Harry and has maintained various visa statuses in both countries. Immigration law provides no discretion when visa applications contain materially false statements. If Meghan misrepresented intentions or income sources on immigration paperwork, mandatory deportation proceedings follow. The contractual implications affect tens of millions. If Spotify and Netflix can prove Meghan entered contracts with no intention of performing, they can sue for fraud seeking return of advances plus damages. Legal experts estimate Meghan's total civil exposure exceeds $60 million before accounting for defense legal fees that could reach $5 million across multiple proceedings. The custody implications carry severity given California family courts make determinations based on children's best interests. Courts consider parental dishonesty and criminal conduct highly relevant when evaluating which parent provides stability. If Meghan faces criminal prosecution, Harry could petition for emergency custody modification. The contractual implications affect millions in outstanding obligations. If Spotify and Netflix can prove Meghan entered agreements with no intention of performing under those contracts, they can sue for fraud in the inducement and seek return of all advance payments plus damages for expenses incurred in preparing for content that was never going to be delivered. Legal experts estimate Meghan's total exposure across these civil claims exceeds $60 million before accounting for legal fees that would easily reach $5 million for defending multiple simultaneous proceedings. The custody implications are particularly severe given that California courts make custody determinations based on the best interests of children. Courts consider parental dishonesty and criminal conduct highly relevant to these determinations. If Meghan faces criminal prosecution, Harry could petition for emergency custody modification, arguing that the children should not be in the care of someone under indictment for fraud. These consequences are not theoretical possibilities, but rather direct applications of established legal frameworks to documented evidence. The scenario analysis reveals 5 distinct pathways forward, each with different probability and outcome characteristics that sophisticated observers should consider when evaluating how this situation will ultimately resolve. Scenario 1 involves full admission and negotiated settlement with prosecutors and civil plaintiffs. In this pathway, Meghan would proactively acknowledge the schemes documented in the recordings, express remorse for the harm caused to individuals and institutions, agree to return all money obtained through fraudulent representations, and cooperate fully with investigators in exchange for reduced charges or immunity from prosecution, depending on the value of her cooperation in broader investigations. This scenario represents the least damaging long-term option because it demonstrates accountability and moral growth while limiting the duration of legal proceedings that would otherwise consume years and millions in defense costs. However, this scenario requires admitting to criminal behavior that would permanently destroy Meghan's public image, likely end her marriage given Harry's demonstrated unwillingness to accept criticism of his choices, and eliminate any possibility of future commercial partnerships with entertainment companies or charitable organizations. Given that every pattern of behavior demonstrated over 7 years shows absolute unwillingness to accept responsibility even for minor errors, this scenario appears extremely unlikely despite being strategically optimal. Scenario 2 involves aggressive denial and victim narrative escalation, where Meghan claims the recordings were taken out of context, deliberately edited to misrepresent her statements, or fabricated entirely using artificial intelligence voice cloning technology. In this pathway, Meghan argues that she was speaking hypothetically about what adversaries might allege, that her legal team misunderstood her instructions and implemented strategies she never approved, and that the entire prosecution is motivated by institutional racism and misogyny designed to silence a powerful woman who challenged establishment norms. This approach generates immediate media support from ideological allies who view any criticism of Meghan through the lens of racial justice rather than evidence evaluation. and it delays legal proceedings through aggressive motions practice that challenges evidence admissibility and prosecutorial jurisdiction. However, the recordings are explicit enough that context cannot plausibly reframe criminal admissions into innocent conversations, and forensic authentication makes fabrication claims untenable. This scenario ultimately fails when prosecutors play the unedited recordings in open court during preliminary hearings or trial, but it could successfully extend the legal process for 2 to 3 years while generating substantial legal fees that deplete whatever assets remain available for defense. Based on Meghan's established behavior pattern of never admitting fault even when contradicted by overwhelming evidence, this represents the most probable scenario despite its ultimate futility. Scenario 3 involves flight to a non extradition jurisdiction before charges are filed, with Meghan relocating to a country that lacks extradition treaty with the United States, taking the children with her, and moving substantial portable assets offshore to avoid civil judgment enforcement. This scenario successfully avoids prosecution but requires permanent exile from both the United States and United Kingdom, sacrifice of all reputation and commercial viability in both countries, and likely triggers automatic custody orders granting Harry full legal and physical custody of both children under California and British law. While theoretically possible for someone with sufficient liquid assets and international connections, this scenario seems unlikely because Meghan's entire commercial value proposition depends on access to American and British media markets that exile would permanently eliminate. Scenario 4 involves default judgment and financial collapse, where Meghan attempts to defend civil cases but lacks sufficient resources for effective criminal defense simultaneously, resulting in civil judgments that exceed her liquid assets, criminal conviction on at least some counts carrying substantial prison sentences, and bankruptcy filing that liquidates remaining assets to partially satisfy judgment creditors while leaving substantial unpaid balances. This scenario unfolds if Scenario 2's aggressive denial strategy collapses under the weight of irrefutable evidence and Meghan lacks either political protection or prosecutorial discretion to avoid felony charges. This represents the second most likely outcome, occurring when the aggressive denial strategy that appeared promising initially proves unsustainable once recordings are admitted into evidence and played for judges or juries. Scenario 5 involves political intervention and selective prosecution decline, where political allies or influential supporters intervene, with prosecutors arguing that charging Meghan serves no legitimate public interest beyond satisfying critics. That prosecution would be perceived as racially or politically motivated persecution, and that resources should be directed toward more serious offenders who caused greater financial harm. In this pathway, prosecutors exercise discretion to decline criminal charges while allowing civil proceedings to continue, permitting Meghan to avoid prison while still facing financial devastation from civil judgments that cannot be discharged through bankruptcy. This scenario requires Meghan to possess far more political capital and influential support than current evidence suggests she retains, making it unlikely but not impossible if unexpected allies emerge or if political winds shift dramatically. Based on the totality of evidence, established personality patterns, resource constraints, and historical precedent for similar high-profile fraud cases, Scenario 2 transitioning inevitably to Scenario 4 represents the most probable pathway forward, with complex legal proceedings likely extending through 2026 and into 2027 before culminating in criminal conviction and complete financial collapse. The urgency of this situation cannot be overstated because multiple critical deadlines with severe legal and financial consequences are converging simultaneously in the coming months. Federal prosecutors must decide whether to file charges before statutes of limitations expire. Netflix has demanded remaining content by September 2025 or will seek return of the $100 million advance. The British High Court will hear perjury allegations in April 2025. What we have documented tonight represents the systematic unraveling of the most elaborate royal deception in modern history. Meghan Markle orchestrated, with full knowledge and detailed planning, a 7-year scheme to extract maximum financial benefit from royal association while creating a victim narrative that would insulate her from accountability. The recordings prove premeditation, prove intent, and prove that every major claim about institutional racism, mental health neglect, and security failures was manufactured for commercial advantage. The legal system will now determine whether this conduct constitutes criminal fraud, perjury, and tax evasion. Type justice if you believe Meghan should face maximum legal consequences. Type mercy if you think she deserves redemption through admission and restitution. Type escape if you think she will avoid prosecution through maneuvering. If you want to know how this resolves, subscribe and enable notifications because developments are happening weekly. Because what we covered tonight is just the fraud dimension of this scandal. The question about whether the Sussex children are actually biological offspring of Harry and Meghan is addressed directly in these recordings with statements even more shocking than what we discussed tonight. I am George Will, and I will see you in the next investigation.